In the rolling hills of ancient Palestine, there lived a wealthy landowner who owned vast estates stretching as far as the eye could see. While the Bible doesn't give us his name, for the sake of our story today, let's call him Benjamin. His olive groves shimmered silver in the morning light, his vineyards hung heavy with purple clusters, and his flocks numbered in the thousands across the fertile valleys. Benjamin had been blessed with 2 sons, as different as night and day. The elder son, we'll call him Caleb, was steady and reliable, rising before dawn to tend the sheep and spending his evenings studying the family's agricultural records. He loved the land as much as his father did. But the younger son, let's call him David, was restless and ambitious. At 25, he paced the estate like a caged lion, his eyes always fixed on the distant horizon, dreaming of adventures beyond the familiar boundaries of home. One morning, as the golden sun painted the courtyard with warm light, David found his father and brother inspecting a new section of vineyard. The air was thick with the sweet fragrance of ripening grapes, and workers moved methodically through the rows, their songs echoing across the peaceful valley. "Father, I need to speak with you. It's important. It can't wait." Benjamin looked up from the vine he was examining, immediately recognizing the tension in David's voice. After 25 years, he knew his younger son's moods like a shepherd knows his flock. "Of course, my son. What troubles your heart so deeply?" David began pacing the stone pathway, his emotions barely contained, words spilling out like water from a broken jar. "I can't live like this anymore, Father. Every single day is exactly the same. Check the sheep, inspect the vines, count the grain, plan for next season. I'm 25 years old, and I feel like I'm dying a slow death of routine and predictability." Caleb straightened up abruptly, dust falling from his work clothes, his face showing both confusion and growing anger. "Dying? David, are you blind? Look around you. We have more wealth and comfort than most men could dream of in 10 lifetimes. This land provides everything: food, shelter, security, respect throughout the region. What more could any reasonable person want?" David whirled to face his brother, his voice rising with passion and frustration. "I want to live, Caleb. Actually live. I want to see the great cities the merchants describe: Damascus, Alexandria, Athens. I want to meet people who don't know my name before I speak it. I want to experience something beyond these same hills and valleys I've stared at every day for 25 years. He turned back to Benjamin, his jaw set with determination, his hands trembling slightly. "Father, I want my inheritance. All of it. Right now. Today. I want you to give me my portion so I can leave this place and make my own way in the world." The words struck the courtyard like lightning, creating a silence so profound that even the workers in the distant fields seemed to pause. In their culture, such a request wasn't just unusual, it was scandalous. It was essentially telling your father that you wished he were dead. The words struck the courtyard like lightning, creating a silence so profound that even the workers in the distant fields seemed to pause. In their culture, such a request wasn't just unusual, it was scandalous. It was essentially telling your father that you wished he were dead. Benjamin's face went pale as understanding dawned. He gripped the edge of a stone wall to steady himself, his voice barely above a whisper. "My son, do you understand what you're asking of me? That inheritance represents your future security, meant to care for you after I'm gone. By demanding it now, you're telling me that in your heart, you already consider me dead." David's resolve flickered for just a moment as he saw the pain etched across his father's weathered face. But his determination burned stronger than his guilt. "I'm not wishing for your death, Father. I'm pleading for my life. There's an entire world out there. Merchants speak of cities where a single building holds more people than our entire valley. There are opportunities for trade, for adventure, for building something entirely my own. I'm suffocating here." Caleb stepped forward, his fists clenched, his face red with indignation. "How dare you? How dare you speak to our father this way? He's spent his entire life building something beautiful and lasting here. He's created security that could provide for our families for generations, and you want to abandon it all like it means nothing." Benjamin raised his weathered hand, and both sons immediately fell silent. For what felt like an eternity, only the distant bleating of sheep and the whisper of wind through olive branches could be heard. Tears glistened in the old man's eyes as he studied David's face, the face he had kissed goodnight for 25 years. "If remaining here brings you such anguish, my son, if you truly believe your path to happiness lies elsewhere, then I won't keep you prisoner here. Love that holds someone against their will ceases to be love at all." What followed was perhaps the most painful afternoon of Benjamin's life. In his private study, surrounded by scrolls and ledgers representing 3 generations of careful stewardship, he calculated David's legal portion. According to the law, the younger son was entitled to 1/3 of everything, a fortune that included gold and silver coins accumulated over decades, deeds to fertile land, and shares in profitable trading ventures. As Benjamin counted out each coin, his hand shook slightly. This wasn't just money he was dividing, it was security, legacy, the fruit of his ancestors' blood and sweat. Each gold piece represented months of careful saving, each silver coin countless hours of labor under the burning sun. David packed his belongings with eager haste, his excitement barely contained. He stuffed his finest robes into leather traveling bags, wrapped his precious possessions in silk cloth, and arranged for servants and pack animals to accompany him. The weight of the gold felt wonderful in his hands, freedom made tangible and real. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, David stood at the estate's main gate. His caravan was ready, loaded donkeys, hired guards, and enough provisions for the long journey ahead. The entire household had gathered to witness his departure, their faces showing a mixture of bewilderment, sorrow, and quiet disapproval. Benjamin approached his son one final time. Without a word, he pulled David into a fierce embrace, holding him as tightly as he had when the boy was small and sought comfort from nightmares or childhood fears. "Thank you for understanding, Father. I know this is hard for you, but I have to follow this path. I'll make something of myself out there, something that will make you proud. You'll see." Benjamin's voice broke as he whispered his response into his son's ear. "You already are something wonderful, my beloved boy. You are treasured beyond all measure. That will never change, no matter how far you travel or how long you're away from home." David pulled away, unable to meet his father's eyes for fear his resolve would crumble. With a sharp command to his servants, he mounted his donkey and set off down the dusty road that led to the great trade routes, his back straight with anticipation and determination. Benjamin stood at the gate long after the caravan had disappeared over the distant hills, until the first stars appeared in the darkening sky and Caleb gently took his arm and led him back inside. David's journey took him across desert valleys and through mountain passes for many weeks, until he finally reached Antioch, one of the greatest cities in the Roman Empire. The metropolis exceeded every dream he had ever harbored, a pulsing center of commerce where merchants from the ends of the earth gathered to trade silk, spices, precious stones, and exotic goods beyond imagination. The streets themselves were like rivers of humanity, flowing with music, laughter, and the intoxicating energy of unlimited possibility. Market stalls displayed treasures from distant lands, street performers entertained crowds with death-defying acts, and the air carried the aromas of cuisines he had never imagined. With his father's gold burning a hole in his purse, David purchased a magnificent villa in the city's most prestigious district. The house was a palace compared to anything back home, marble floors polished to mirror brightness, walls decorated with intricate frescoes, and gardens filled with exotic flowers that perfumed the air with their sweetness. He furnished his new home with the finest luxuries money could buy: silk cushions from China, golden goblets studded with precious gems, tables carved from rare African woods, and sculptures that depicted gods and heroes from distant mythologies. Word of the wealthy young foreigner spread through Antioch's social circles like wildfire. Soon, David found himself at the center of a sophisticated crowd eager to introduce him to every pleasure the great city offered. They were charming, cultured people who knew the best restaurants, the most exclusive entertainment venues, and the most profitable business opportunities. Marcus, a smooth-talking merchant with expensive tastes and impeccable manners, appointed himself as David's guide to city life. A gentleman of your obvious wealth and refinement deserves only the absolute finest experiences our magnificent city can provide. Come, allow me to introduce you to the most exclusive circles in all of Antioch. The parties that became David's nightly ritual were affairs of legendary excess. Professional musicians played until dawn while dancers from distant lands performed exotic routines. The rarest wines flowed like water and tables groaned under elaborate feasts featuring delicacies from every corner of the empire: roasted peacocks stuffed with dates and almonds, honey-glazed lamb from distant valleys, fruits that had traveled thousands of miles to reach their plates. David reveled in being the undisputed center of attention at these gatherings, his generous spending making him instantly popular and constantly sought after. To David, the most generous soul in all the empire, may his fortune never diminish and his noble heart never change. The crowd raised their cups with enthusiastic cheers, but David was too intoxicated by wine and flattery to notice the calculating glances exchanged between some of his so-called friends. Months melted away in an endless blur of indulgence and excess. David's days began at noon and ended at sunrise. He developed expensive hobbies that devoured his inheritance, betting enormous sums on gladiator contests and chariot races, purchasing rare artifacts for his ever-growing collection, hosting elaborate banquets where whole roasted animals were served on golden platters while entertainers performed for crowds of hundreds. He distributed lavish gifts like a king bestowing royal favors, convinced that his generosity was buying him genuine friendship and lasting happiness. In his wine-clouded judgment, he believed he was living exactly the life he had been meant for. But wealth spent without wisdom disappears with terrifying speed, especially when surrounded by vultures who see riches as prey rather than blessing. Life is short and uncertain. We must seize every pleasure while fortune smiles upon us. David laughed as he threw handfuls of gold coins into the air, delighting in watching his guests scramble to collect them like children gathering fallen fruit. But nearby, Marcus whispered to another companion just loudly enough for careful ears to catch. Our generous friend is good for perhaps 6 more weeks of this magnificent madness. 8 at the most if we pace ourselves carefully and don't drain him too quickly. The first warning sign came when David attempted to balance his accounts one afternoon. Sitting in his study, surrounded by empty wine jugs and costly trinkets, he stared at numbers that seemed impossible. This cannot be right. I began with enough wealth to last several lifetimes. Where could it all have gone so quickly? But the merciless mathematics were accurate. Between his reckless spending, devastating gambling losses, expensive gifts, and the army of parasites who had been systematically bleeding his resources, David's inheritance had evaporated like morning mist before the desert sun. Reality struck with the force of a physical blow 3 days later. His landlord arrived at the villa accompanied by several large, unfriendly men whose presence made their intentions clear. Your rent, young David. 6 months overdue now. The amount is quite substantial, and my patience with wealthy young men has reached its absolute limit. David's mouth went dry as sand. In his relentless pursuit of pleasure, he had completely ignored mundane concerns like rent, servants' wages, and household expenses. Certainly, we can reach some arrangement. My friends will help me. We've become like family through all we've shared together. Just give me a few days to speak with them. The landlord's laughter was harsh and without mercy. Your friends moved on to richer prey weeks ago. They're currently entertaining a silk merchant from Damascus who arrived with fresh gold. You have exactly 1 hour to gather your belongings and leave. Desperate and beginning to panic, David raced through the streets to find Marcus and his other companions. He found them at their customary tavern, but their reception was shockingly cold and hostile. Marcus, thank the gods I found you. I'm in serious trouble and desperately need your help. Just a temporary loan to tide me over until I can reorganize my finances. Marcus stared through David as if he were looking at a complete stranger, his eyes cold as winter stones. I'm sorry, but I don't believe we've been introduced. You must have mistaken me for someone else. I suggest you move along before I'm forced to summon the city guards. The others at the table suddenly found their wine cups fascinating, refusing to meet David's increasingly desperate gaze. In that crushing moment, he understood with perfect clarity that he had never possessed a single genuine friend, only people who enjoyed the privilege of spending his money. Standing alone in the street with nothing but a pathetic bundle of personal possessions, David faced a reality more terrifying than death itself. For the first time in his pampered, privileged life, he was completely alone in the world with no resources, no support, and no prospects. As if fate itself were conspiring against him, a severe famine struck the entire region at precisely that moment. Crops withered and died in the fields, food prices soared beyond reach, and employment became virtually impossible to find. David, who had never performed a day of physical labor in his entire life, found himself competing with desperate, hardened men for any work at all. Days stretched into weeks as he wandered from farm to farm, marketplace to marketplace, begging for any opportunity to earn bread. His expensive clothes became torn and filthy, his soft hands developed painful calluses and bleeding cuts, and the confident young man who had left his father's house began to disappear entirely. Finally, at a pig farm outside the city walls, David found employment. For a Jewish man, feeding swine was the most degrading work imaginable. These animals were considered unclean according to religious law. But pride had become a luxury he could no longer afford. The work was backbreaking, disgusting, and soul-crushing. Every morning before dawn, David hauled heavy buckets of slop to the pig pens, watching the animals fight viciously over scraps while his own stomach cramped with agonizing hunger. His wages were barely enough to purchase moldy bread and rent a space to sleep among the other desperate laborious. One blazing afternoon, as he watched the pigs devouring their meal with savage enthusiasm, David's spirit finally shattered completely. He stared at the pig slop and felt his mouth water with desperate hunger.